All right, everyone, welcome back. So tonight's lecture, we're going to actually finish up the Arkanoid project. We're going to take a real quick second to review some of the stuff we had done in last lecture, and then we'll tear through finishing this thing up. Now, there's a fair amount of little bits and pieces in terms of settings. The code is fairly straightforward in the like 3 or 4 sections of what it does. But it's a fair amount of typing, and I want to try to burn through this as quickly as possible. So I'll try to limit my overly verbose explanations on this stuff. All right. So the last lecture we went through and we actually mapped the ball to the paddle. That's that offset calculation that we did. We also looked at sorting out when the ball was capable of slamming into something, and then using the reflect to invert its physics direction. We also considered what would happen if we ever shaved off the entirety of either the x or y component of the velocity vector, meaning we would be locked into an axis. So that's where we had the nudge if necessary, just to give ourselves a little bit of a boost, a little fudge factor to get out of that locked, game's over kind of state. We also turned the game manager into a singleton. That way we could access it throughout the entire of our project. We looked at refactoring the playing variable. We also started to use the game manager as a variable, as an information dumping ground, so that we could reference it later. We also started some initial level management stuff with regards to winning and losing. You hit the bottom plane, you lose. You destroy the last brick, you win. We also fleshed out the individual bricks themselves so that they were self-aware, self-contained in terms of their counting up and counting down when they get destroyed and whatnot. So we also added a safeguard to basically tell us if we accidentally put that brick script on some other object that's not capable of being destroyed, then it'll let us know that we've indeed made a slight miscalculation and would then need to repair that. All right, so in today's lecture, I'm going to go through and we'll actually wrap up some of the UI in the main level that we've been working in, right? We've been building level 1. So we'll also take a look at how to construct the start level, the end level, how we can start to turn the stuff inside level 1 into prefabs. That way we can reuse it for like level 2, 3, so on. We'll also look at general submission and that kind of stuff. But we also need to flesh out the game manager so that it is capable of transitioning to multiple levels or being aware when level loading actually takes place. The Unity engine is actually going to give us a lot of information, a lot of useful information that we could turn around and use to our advantage with regards to resetting things. Should that be part of your design, right? Resetting score from level to level, resetting the brick count. Now, we noticed in last lecture, the bricks themselves, they're capable of both counting up and counting down once they're started and destroyed. However, there's always the possibility that that code might accidentally not be called. So I'll also add a bit of compensation code in there that says whenever we do transition to another level, just go ahead and clear out that static brick count. That way we can ensure that we always start with 0 bricks, so that regardless of what's going on in the brick, we don't accidentally leave ourselves in that we've destroyed all the bricks, but there might still be 1 left counted, so we never actually win that level. So that'll be just a safety, kind of an override to just as a double check to make sure we're actually doing our stuff correctly. All right, so that wraps up the slides. And so I'm back in my project from what I did the last time. If you stuck around to the very end of the video or were here in lecture, I went through and I kind of fiddled around with some bricks and additional script and that kind of stuff, and answered some questions on location and whatnot. But those bits and pieces have been cleaned up. They're no longer in here. So we should be back to exactly where we left off in the last lecture. Okay? So same thing with code. There shouldn't be any kind of modifications happening over there. All right. So the very first thing I want to do, this was actually a slight oversight in the last lecture. When we start bouncing the ball around the scene, from the very beginning, there's the possibility that it could collide with the paddle, which would trigger that on collision enter, which could potentially nullify or skew our velocity, our RB velocity in some way. So as I'm running through this level, or as I'm running through this code and I'm bouncing the ball around the level, and I start doing this fixed update to calculate our previous frame's velocity, I also want to do one quick update down here inside apply velocity. Now, the game will probably run fine, but this was a bit of code that I accidentally left out of the last lecture. So all I need to do is say actually, let's just do this the easy way. I want to copy this v velocity last frame. Okay. Come down to apply velocity inside the ball.cs, and at the very beginning, I want to paste that in and add a couple of spaces and an equal sign. Now, generally speaking, if you take a look at what's going on, starting from the right, working your way to the left, we're taking the normalized direction of the ball and multiplying it by power. We're assigning that to the rigid body's velocity, and then we're assigning that to the velocity last frame. So we can chain these kinds of operations together, equals, equals, equals. So whatever this value becomes will be dumped into the velocity, and whatever velocity then becomes will be dumped into the furthest left variable. So that's going to keep track of the velocity just in case. It's certainly possible that that won't change anything, but it's worth repairing just to get that out of the way. Okay, so at this point, the code is almost complete, but now I need to actually start getting some more visual interaction with my user, right? I want to get the brick count, I want to get the score information up to the level 1 and so on screens, level 2, level 3, that kind of stuff. So to do that, I'm going to jump back over to Unity. Okay, and if you notice inside this Arkanoid layout, we've got this information up here at the top. Well, I'm going to take a little bit of creative freedom here, creative liberties, and I'm going to put scoring information in one corner and brick information in the other. It's purely informational. That way you can track, like, hey, if I've destroyed all my bricks and I still see that it counts like 1 or something like that, maybe something else is going on. So to do all this, here inside my hierarchy, with nothing selected, I want to right-click and go down to UI and say I want a text object. Now, when I create that text object, it's going to give me a camera and an event system automatically. So I want to tune this with some specific variables, but I know that the text object I'm going to have on the left side of the screen is almost identical to the one on the right in terms of its settings and that kind of stuff. So I can just duplicate the existing text object and then repurpose some of the custom settings. So with this text selected, I can do Control-D to get a second one. Okay? So going back to the first text object, if I have it selected and I click again, go all the way to the left, I want to rename this to score text. And then this next one, with it selected, I can also hit F2. And I want to get rid of this parentheses 1 space, go all the way to the left, and this one I want to rename bricks text. Okay? That's strictly for organizational purposes, because the code that I'm going to write here in just a minute, actually, when we load up a new scene, we'll scan the scene's hierarchy looking for specific text objects with specific names in order to properly bind. This is very similar to the thing that we did in the week 2 project, where we looked for a text object. In this case, I'm going to have multiple text objects, and I'm going to use their names as the filtering mechanism. Okay, so with score text selected, I need to actually give it a proper position. Now, I've already decided I want this thing to be in the upper left and then the other one in the upper right with a slight offset and some additional modifications. So with score text selected, I want to click on this Anchor Presets button, and with Shift and Alt pressed and held on my keyboard, Notice the UI changes depending on which one I have held at any point, and ignore the changes happening up here to my manipulation bar. That's just part of how the key bindings are. So with Shift and Alt held, I want to pick this upper left. Right. So if I follow these columns, right, there's left and there's top, and that will put this text object up there in the upper left corner. It's kind of hard to see, right? But if I scroll in using my mouse wheel or 2 fingers on the Mac, I can use the middle mouse button to kind of pull the window over a little bit, and I can see that it's up there in the corner. Okay. So I said I want to give it some kind of an offset. So the position X, I want to set that to 10. That's just going to get it off the edge of the screen. Okay. Now the placeholder text, I actually want to say score, colon, space, 3 question marks, a comma, and 3 more question marks. This will act strictly as a placeholder. If I see this in my view, I know that something about my code has either failed or I've missed a call somewhere or something along those lines. This also gives me, as a designer, a kind of good heads up as far as where my UI would look. Now later on, if you start dealing with, or rather when you start dealing with things like localization and internationalization, you'll notice some of these characters can be longer or shorter, and certain words have to fit in certain regions. So as a designer, as I'm mocking up my screen here, I want to go in and use some kind of a character, question marks. W's tend to be fairly wide, so you can actually kind of sketch in where this stuff would be, and if you need to make any kind of design considerations as far as width and real estate, screen real estate, because you can easily have these things accidentally overlap if they're really close to each other. So using this gives me both the visual indicator that, you know, something may not be working properly in my code if I'm expecting numbers here, and it also gives me a quick screenshot heads up, like this is where stuff will be once those systems are actually functional. Okay, so I don't want to change anything in the characters, but down here under paragraph, and I just realized I did the duplication even after I said I was going to make those changes anyway. Hey, whatever, never mind. So I want to set this to center middle as far as the alignment is concerned. Okay. Now, when you first create these things, the box you're given is actually fairly, I mean, it's big enough for a lot of content, but if you start manipulating the size or add a whole bunch of text, the 160 by 30 will actually be fairly small, and your text will suddenly disappear. So you can resize, like we did with the week 2 project. You can resize that whole text box to be the size of your screen or something much larger. But again, if you exceed those bounds, your text will just go away. Additionally, if you have this best fit toggled, it'll give you 2 extra buttons, 2 extra entries down here, and those will additionally go in and try to modify your code. Right? I turned that off because I don't want that active. But if you ever start seeing your text just suddenly resizing for weird reasons and it suddenly disappears, that's one of the things to keep in mind. So in this case, I want to ignore the box that my text is in. I want it to overflow and overflow its both vertical and horizontal bounds. So here under horizontal overflow and vertical overflow, I want to change this from wrap and truncate to just overflow and overflow. Okay? And to make this visually pop a bit more, I want to change its color to just red. Okay, so those are all the changes necessary for the scores text. Now I'm basically going to do the same thing, but with slight modifications to the bricks text. So with the bricks text selected, I want to click on this anchor presets window, press and hold both Shift and Alt, and pick this upper right corner version. Give it an offset. We're coming in from the right, so this needs to be -10 units. Okay. The placeholder text I want to use is bricks, colon, 1, 2, 3 question marks. Now the reason I chose six question marks and a comma for score is the score can probably get up there. But if I have more than 999 bricks in my scene, that's a pretty populated scene, and that I should probably look at redesigning what I'm dealing with. Okay, so character, nothing's going to change there. Alignment, in this case, actually I made one mistake here. I'm going to go back to the text, the score text. I want this to be left aligned because it's going to be snug right up against this side, but 10 units in based on our position offset. Okay, so left aligned, but keep that center. Okay, going back to brick, this one I want to make right aligned. So it's going to nudge it right up against the right side of the screen, but also come into the left 10 units. I want to set it to middle again. One of these is center, one of these is middle. I forget which. I also want to do the same overflow adjustment. So wrap can go to overflow and truncate can go to overflow. And the same thing, I want to modify the interesting. I'm not getting my color well. So well, it's okay. If you're paying real close attention, you'll notice the focus on the window is actually changing. So it's out there somewhere. Just no clue where. So let's. It was hiding behind go-to training. For those curious how I got this back, it was actually on my second screen hiding under a program that takes control or whatever. So because I had clicked this and I knew that some other window had focus, if you press and hold Alt on your keyboard and press the space bar, you'll get the the little dialogue up here. And then even if the window is hidden, you'll still get that. It'll still pop up on your screen somewhere. So if you go down to move, press enter, you can then start to drag this thing around using your arrow keys. So that's how I got it back. Useful for when these things decide to hide. So in this case, yep, did the exact same thing. That's interesting. I'm going to move it back over. But okay, this might be another just general bug because you're seeing it's updating up here, but the image or the color down here is not updating. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on. Probably a good restart of Unity will sort that out. But it's doing what we need it to do, even if the inspector is not reflecting those updates. So we can move on. So save. Okay, so that sorts us out with what our UI is going to be over here inside our level 1. Now, I'm going to start constructing the UI as well for the start screen as well as the finish screen, because a lot of the functionality that I'm going to write in code is actually going to link to both of these things, both the start end screens and the UI stuff that we just wrote. So we can knock it all out in one fell swoop. Okay? So we're good with this level. Everything in here should be okay. And now I want to create a new scene. So Control End. And I'm going to go ahead and save this in my scenes folder. I'm just going to call it Start. Okay. Now I want my background, you see we're in 3D, so we have this skybox, but I still want to retain kind of like what our level 1 does. I want to just set that to a clear color. So with my camera selected, I can change this skybox down to solid color, and I can change this this color well, I want to use 63. 63 and 63. This is just a dark gray color, nothing really special about it. All right, totally just an artistic choice at this point. And we don't really need to manipulate anything else about the camera. You could set it to orthographic if you so chose, but there's really no reason to. Position, same kind of thing. The stuff we're about to create is actually going to be mapped to the screen, to the camera's screen, so its physical position in the scene won't matter with regards to these settings. But if you did add 3D objects into your scene or something along those lines, then you would need to be aware maybe your position needs to be changed ever so slightly. Okay? So for my start screen, the start screen and the end screen are going to be very similar. Their buttons are going to be named slightly different, and the text that's going to be presented is also going to be slightly different. But generally speaking, I'm going to have a title, a subtitle, and 2 buttons. The first button will be either to play or to play again, and the second button will be to quit the game. Okay? So to do that, again, just like we did in level 1, right-click in the hierarchy with nothing selected, go down to UI, and create text. Okay? Now I want to duplicate this text object, because I'll fill it in here in just a second. But now I want to create my 2 buttons. So with the canvas selected, not the text, if I have one of the text selected, this button will be a child. That's not what I want. I want it to be right here under canvas. So canvas selected, right click, UI, button, and I want to duplicate that button. Okay? So starting from the top, working our way down, this very first text, I want to rename it to be title text. The next text object I want to rename, get rid of that pair of parentheses and the 1 in the space. I want to rename this to subtitle text. The next item down, the first button, I want to name it play button. And I want to rename the second button, get rid of that duplicate information. I want to rename this to quit button. Okay? Okay, so from the top, working our way down, the title text, I want it to be in the center, but just slightly vertically offset. So right now it's in the center, but sometimes this math over here, it can compensate for different things. So I'm going to force it to be center anyway, just to reset these numbers. This is the preset, but what gets changed over here might differ from what you're dealing with. So overriding that by pressing and holding Shift and Alt, and clicking right here in the center. Right? So center on this column, middle on this column. And notice it nullified my X and Y offsets. Okay? That's exactly what I wanted to happen. Now that it's at the center, I want to give it a vertical offset of 108. Okay? That just nudges it right up there, just above all my other stuff. Okay? So I'm going to leave all the rest of these settings alone. The text for this is actually going to be Arkanoid. Okay? And if you mash enter in here, this is a multi-line box, so you just need to click outside of it to change other things. I want to modify the font. I need this thing to be a lot larger. It's the title after all. So I'm going to change this to 36. Now this is an example of what I was talking about a second ago. Notice with a larger font size, that text is gone. So we'll fix that down here under truncate. Switch that to overflow and switch wrap to overflow and switch truncate to overflow in the horizontal and vertical offsets. Okay. Now this one I want to set to center middle. Okay. And we go ahead and give this a color red, just to make it pop a little bit more. Okay, so that'll conclude the title text. Now let's go to the subtitle text and do basically the same thing. Click on this presets, Shift and Alt, center it out. Now this one, I want to give a vertical offset of 54. That's going to put it just between the top title and the first button. Okay. The text, in this case, if you look into the lore of the Arkanoid project, your ship, it's called the VAUS, V-A-U-S, and you're escaping from an attacked mothership, an attack, all this other stuff, right? So we're just going to call this VAUS escape. Okay. And because it's a subtitle, I want it to have just a slight increase in its font, so let's go to 24. I also want this to be center middle. I also don't want it to wrap or truncate, so I'm going to set those two to overflow. And I want to change the color. In this case, I want to make this an obnoxious green color, just to show a little bit of difference. So no red, full green, no blue. Okay, that's that lime right there in the center. All right. So at this point, I can only do so much with the two buttons that I've created. Now I'm going to construct method calls over inside my game manager as it relates to like level management and that kind of stuff. And when I do that, I'll then return to these buttons here and in the end screen and actually attach them. So for the moment, all I want to do is change the text that's inside the play button to be play, and the quit button to be quit. Okay. But notice these two buttons are currently overlapping. So I want to take the quit button, and it's already centered and whatnot, but we can enforce that again. All right. Same thing with the play button. Okay. So with the quit button selected, I want to change its Y offset to be -49. And that just gives us this little adjustment right there. Okay. So at this point, I need to start looking into how I would want to do some of this level management stuff. Okay. So I'm going to save my scene, and I'm going to jump back to the game manager. Okay. And the way Unity works to be able to attach functionality, code functionality, to a button, like through this UI or even through code, is you have to have a method that it can call, and it has to be public. It also has to exist inside a script that's on a prefab. It has to be outside of the main hierarchy. It doesn't understand where the thing lives if it's just in the hierarchy. So we'll do a modification to the game manager here in just a second to give us those extra little requirements to fulfill those requirements. So I need to, let's see here, let's take a look at just above our ending conditions, right? But before our, or rather after our awake, I want to add another section of code, and I want to call this scene management. Give myself a little bit of space. And I want to be able to, whenever I press the button play inside the start screen, or when I press play again over inside end, or when I press quit, I want to be able to do certain bits of functionality. I want to either go from start to level 1, maybe I want to go from end back to start, and then when I press quit, I want to actually either one of two things. If I'm playing the game in the editor, I want to stop the editor itself from playing programmatically. If I'm running an actual built game, I want to kill the game itself, right? Just quit the game. So to do that, I need to write a couple of methods. So public void load scene. I'm going to take in a string, and it'll be called the level for which we will load. Okay, and the other is going to be a public void and I'm going to call this quit game. It won't take anything in. Its functionality is pretty straightforward. So to actually do scene loading and jumping around, I need to take advantage of Unity's scene management system. Now, just like we had to bring in a new library for our UI, I also have to do the same thing with regards to the scene management. So the class itself is called scene manage, and you notice here in my drop down I'm not getting anything. That's the first indication that I need to pull in some extra information. So it's called scene manager, but it doesn't know what that is. So the potential fixes to resolve scene manager, if I click right here, using Unity Engine.scene management. So if I click that and scroll back up to the top real quick, you'll notice it added this line of code automatically for me. Okay. Back down here to scene manager, I can do load scene, and I'm going to pass in the level that we just got in as a variable. Okay. Now, when it comes to quit game, we also have another bit of functionality out there, another library class that we can talk to called application. And off of that, we have the call quit. Now, the thing is, here in the editor, that won't do anything. But in a live built game, it will quit the application. So I want to add one more little kind of trick to basically have the code understand that it's in the editor and to be able to then talk to the editor's version of application. So I don't want this code to be compiled if it's part of a live real application. I only want it to exist if I'm inside the editor. So I can use a special kind of if check. We don't really go too far into this, just know that they are available. You can tune your code based on the platform, based on whether or not you're in a standalone player versus the editor itself. So I want to do pound or hashtag or whatever. So pound if, and I want to say Unity underscore editor. And just like we do with a regular if statement, we have an opening and closing curly bracket for the body. When it comes to this kind of technique, you need to add end if, right? Pound end if at the end of it. Now, in between these two lines, I can call out to a bit of functionality that exclusively lives in the editor. But to do this, I also have to talk to the editor class, just like I did with the scene management or with the UI. Now, I could add that line of code using Unity editor at the top of my file, but then I'd have to also protect it with this line that says only do this code here in the editor. I can bypass that by saying instead of importing the entire bit of functionality up there at the very top, just import this one single line of functionality. So I can say Unity editor dot editor application. Notice it's very similar to application up here, okay? But in this case, it's in the editor. And now I want to access the property is playing, and I want to set that to false. This is that play button. I'm telling the editor to stop playing. This will mimic the functionality as if it were an actual built game. It's just a quick little, hey, you can do kind of cool things instead of trying to jump back to the editor and stop playing or whatever. You can drive this, or actually you'll be in the editor, but you can enforce this functionality. Okay, so saved, and at this point, let's see. Okay, so that'll conclude this bit of code to actually do level management or shutting things down. Now, if I jump back to Unity, let that compile. Here inside Start, if I go down to the button itself that I want to have do something. And if I scroll down in its inspector, I see this messages block here. Currently, it's listening. It doesn't have anything, but it would be listening for whenever you click, it'll send this event, and it will call some code on some object. So to add our code to this, I need to press this plus down here on the bottom. And right now it says none, so I need to do this circle select. Now when I do that, I get this dialog that allows me to look through my current scene or my assets hierarchy. Okay? And a bunch of other stuff that's in the engine as well. Now the thing is, I just wrote this functionality on the game manager. So, well, that's the game manager, right? It should just work. Here's the thing. That's a script. Okay, that's not an instance of a thing running, which is what this bit of functionality requires to be able to send a message to when the game is actually running. You'll notice this by over here inside my listing. If I click this no function, I get just monoscript and only the name. This is a very limited list. There's no real core functionality. That's a quick indicator to me that I've done something wrong. This is not the object I'm looking for. So with it selected here inside, right, if you click off, notice how things have this little blue tint around them. If I select the one that's inside this selection well, I can press delete or backspace on my keyboard and it'll clear it out, right? So I know at this point I need to actually take my game manager where the script lives, turn it into a prefab so that I can slot that in as an object. Okay? So I'm going to save this scene. I'm going to jump back to level 1. And now I've created this prefabs folder from first lecture. I'm going to click and drag my game manager down to that prefabs folder. Okay? So now that I've made that modification, I need to save this scene. Okay? Now if I jump back to start, drill down through the canvas, take a look at the inspector, and if I circle select again, I don't currently have it in my scene, but I can use it, right? The engine will figure out what I'm trying to talk to. I can either drag it into my scene or I can talk to it. Notice I have two now. So I can talk directly to this version. But if you remember, just taking a step back, if you remember the game manager's awake has a certain bit of code to enforce resolution, set resolution, right? Just as a reminder, here inside Game Manager, looking down at Start, this bit of code to reinforce the scaling. Now, when the game starts, Start screen is the very first one that's going to pop up. So it should be the one responsible for sorting out whether or not we've actually set our resolution. So what I'm going to do instead, this works perfectly fine, but I also want this screen to do that functionality. So I'm going to click and drag this Game Manager prefab into my scene. Just as long as I have a copy up here that's not a child. If it's a child, you'll get a warning as soon as you start playing that says objects that have that don't destroy on load, they have to be a root level. So I can't have this be a child of anything. And that's fine. So jumping back over here to the play button, it'll reference this guy. If I click on
How did you get that instance there you're saying?
This instance here?
Yeah, that.
How did I create this one?
Yeah.
If, let me save real quick. If I jump back over to level 1,
Right.
the game manager that was inside my hierarchy,
Right.
click and drag that onto the prefabs folder, and it'll automatically create that object. Now, when they're blue like this, it means they're linked. Prefabs at this point should be a review for you guys from past classes. Yes, no? Okay. So you'll if you haven't already, you'll definitely be working with these things. They basically, prefabs give us the ability, kind of like classes, right? We wrote a single class in code, and then we said, I want a number of these classes, like the pages. Here, a prefab gives us the ability to take some bit of stuff inside our hierarchy and kind of shrink wrap it. That way we can create a number of them out there in our scene. Like we can drag this prefab up, right? And imagine these are bricks, for example. And we'll actually do that here in just a little bit. We'll create multiple bricks. But every one of these things, they all refer back to this one game object down here that was this prefab. And you'll notice the inspector changed slightly. I got this prefab listing. So if I click select, it tells me, oh, you're actually talking to this object. Now the idea behind this is that if you have, let's say, 100 objects scattered throughout your scene, and you're like, ah, crap, I want to make some kind of a color adjustment or some kind of like font adjustment or something like that, would you want to go through and update 100 different objects? Or would it be cool if you could update one and then hit an update all button and have that change propagate through the rest of your scene? Well, that's what prefabs give you. If I come through here, imagine this was something like the brick or some other thing, and I modified some setting here inside my, like the hierarchy, the inspector list, if I had other components and that kind of stuff, I could come up here to this apply button, and as soon as I click that, it pushes those changes down through into the prefab that's right here. And every other instance, like Game Manager 1 and 2 here, or in any of my other scenes that reference back to it, would have those updates automatically carry over. So it's one of those things that Unity figured out a long time ago. Like, you're going to be instancing a lot of stuff. So if you're, tuning a bunch of, let's say it's a forest or a whole bunch of bricks on a building, and you want to change, some individual setting of those bricks to propagate through the rest of the entire thing, this allows you to do that. And there are safeguards built in, like if you accidentally change something and you don't want that change, but you want the one down here, you can then click revert, and it'll reverse update. Apply pushes it down, reverse brings it back up. Okay, so I don't need either of these two game managers that I created. Do I? All set with?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so now that exists as a prefab, I'm just going to save, jump back over to start, and then all I did was drag it up into this scene. The intent here is just for that set resolution or any other special startup code that I want. But if I go looking down through my hierarchy, now that I've slotted in, I can either use that circle select to pick the game object, and notice this is a .prefab, not a .cs. If I pick the .cs, I get no functionality over here other than just the name. If I instead pick the game manager version, or sorry, the prefab version, this dropdown now has a bit more functionality. So I have all the stuff off the game object, all the stuff from the transform, and the game manager itself, the thing that I just wrote, including a bunch of parent things. So the play button, I said a second ago, I want to send it to, in this case, let's go to level 1. All right. So the method I wrote to do that is load scene. Notice load scene, and it takes in a string. Okay. And then there's quit game. So I'm going to use load scene, and now it gives me this box for which I can put text into. If that had actually taken in an integer or a float or something like that, that box right there would change, allowing you to put in an integer or a float or whatever. It customizes itself based on what you told it to do. So in this case, I know from this scene I want to go to level underscore 01. So level underscore 01. Okay? So looking at how this is just generally flowing, over here in my scene, while I'm playing, if I press play, if I click on play, this play button here is listening for an on-click event. When it detects that, it will call out to game manager, the object. It will call the method load scene, and it will pass in the string level underscore 01. The code that I wrote, which calls into the scene manager and does load scene, will then transition us to the next scene. Okay? So while I'm here, let me go ahead and plug in this quit button. So with the quit button selected, we'll do the same thing. Click the plus, and I can either use that circle select and find my object, or I can just manually either drag in the version here from my project, or I can pull in the one from my scene. And once you've saved a scene, reloaded it, these things should all kind of map back to the same instance. Sometimes you'll get into a situation where there's a slight disconnect. That's because behind the scenes, Unity understands this as this is a file that exists on your hard drive, right? Somewhere on your file system. This is an instance with all the information pointing to that file, but this line of functionality actually lives inside the .unity file, your scene. So sometimes, if your scenes are acting a little weird, save it, reload it, maybe reload Unity, because these are all pointing back to the same thing. They just, depending on what you're trying to do, they can function differently. So it's worth keeping that in the back of your mind so you can go through and just verify which of the two am I actually talking to. So if I click on the object, it'll show me which one I'm actually talking to. Right? It'll highlight it for a split second. Okay, so we'll go to this functions dropdown, go down to Game Manager, and pick Quit Game. Okay? So now, if I save this scene and start playing, let's detach this window. Give myself a little bit more real estate to play around with. If I hit quit, the editor stops playing. That's that is playing equals false functionality in action. However, if I start playing and I say, okay, one second. Okay, so if I start playing here inside the start scene and I click play, you'll notice I get this error. This particular scene, the one we just sent in, couldn't be loaded because it probably doesn't exist either in the build settings or the asset bundle. You can ignore the asset bundle stuff for now. That's not a thing we'll even be touching. But the build settings, that matters. So what it's referring to, if I stop playing, and I can redock this screen. Okay. What it's referring to is if you, on your keyboard, press Control-Shift-B or go up here to File, Build Settings, it's referring to this dialog. This dialog we briefly covered earlier. The scenes inside your build and even inside your editor, if it's going to go to it, it needs to know about it ahead of time. So what we can do is pull this window off to the side, come down here, we have level 0, 1, and we have start. If I press and hold control while I've got those two selected, I can then drag these items up into this build scenes list. I could reorder these because sometimes this order over here, 0, 1, 2, so on, is important. And when we get into levels here in just a second, and the win screen or lose screen, this will also be important. Okay, so now that these two exist in this build settings list, if I play and click play, I now go to level 1. Cool. So that starts to establish the ability to link to other scenes through code and using buttons and that kind of stuff. So now that I've got the start screen and its functionality pretty much complete, one thing you will notice though is I have a game manager here. This is a caveat, or sorry, not a caveat, a little side note. I've got game manager here, but then over here in level 1, I've also got game manager. Remember what I said earlier about the way the game manager is a singleton. There can only be one, Highlander style. When this thing first starts up, if you start playing over here in this scene, things seem to function perfectly fine, right? You have Game Manager once underneath this Don't Destroy on Load scene. If I go back to Start and I play, I now have the 1 here, and if I click Play and transition over to level 1, I still have just 1. That's because the code here inside Awake is called whenever a scene is loading up. The objects inside that hierarchy start to populate. The Game Manager from Start wakes up. It says, I am currently null. I now equal this. Now when we go over to level 1, level 1's Game Manager wakes up and says, it's a static instance, so it currently equals the this from the other screen, meaning it does not equal this from the new screen, and it immediately destroys the version that's inside the level 1. That way we don't have duplicates floating around throughout our scene. And we're always talking to that first one. In this case, we're always kind of talking back to that prefab, more specifically the instance of that prefab inside Start. So in case you're curious why that sticks around, if you omit this line, Don't Destroy on Load, or this destroy, then you'll possibly start seeing other objects floating in your scene as you go from level to level. It'll start to like duplicate itself, and that can lead to some weird scenarios. So sorting that out will keep everything clean. Okay, 1 second. All right, hopefully that didn't break anything. Okay, so now that I've established that the start screen is basically complete, it's got all the bits and pieces that we need, I want to create the end scene. That way we can actually lose or win and see our lose-win messages, see our scoring information, that kind of stuff. So I want to take the start with it saved, right? So I've got all my stuff pushed into the scene. I want to highlight the start scene down here at the bottom, and I want to Control D to duplicate. I want to rename start 1 to just be end. Now this one single end screen is actually going to serve dual roles. It's going to have slots in it, UI objects that basically get tuned based on how I've actually played the game. So in some past versions, you may have heard we had a win scene and a lose scene that we went to independently, 2 completely different scenes. In this case, I'm going to repurpose just that one. I'm going to customize the data just prior to entering it. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so now that I've duplicated it, I'm still inside start, so I want to go to end. So double click the end scene, and now my end scene is loaded. You can see it right up here in the hierarchy. You can also see it up here in the title bar, end.unity. Now inside this scene, I want to change the title text. We're no longer Arkanoid, we are Game Over. We can retain pretty much all the other settings. There's no need to change any of the rest of that stuff. Okay, the subtitle text. Now, when we write the code to drive all the data into these UI objects that we're creating here, when we go into level 1, 2, 3, so on, we're going to specifically look for the 2 corner text objects. And we're going to bind those to text objects in our code. Now, when we get to this final screen, I want to do a slight modification of the subtitle text. I want to color it, and I want to change its text to reflect whether or not I've won or lost. Now, to do that, the way the code is going to be set up, it is level agnostic, meaning as soon as I go to start or end, it doesn't care, or level 1 or any other levels, it just does a scan. Now, if I, in the code, am looking for those 2 specific named pieces, right, for level 1, well, shouldn't it suffice that I could also look for this subtitle modify its internal text, but when I go back to the start screen, I don't want that same change to apply. I don't want start telling me I've won or lost. I want start to still say VOS escape. So what I'm going to do is modify in the end scene this text element's title. And then in code, when it goes scanning through the scene, when it goes to start, it won't find this. When it goes to end, it will find this. And then the appropriate links are made and everything just updates accordingly. So here, I want to rename the subtitle text to be game over underscore subtitle text. This is just going to differentiate it between those two scenes. Okay? And now, instead of this VOS escape, I'm going to change this to say win / lose placeholder. Right? So if I see the word placeholder in my code somewhere, just like those question marks in level 1, I know I'll need to modify that. I want to change it to be a slightly different obnoxious color. So instead of green, I want to go to magenta, which is actually 255 in the red, 0 in the green, and 255 in the blue. Okay? So 2 indicators here. If I see the word placeholder or if I see the color magenta, I know something has failed and I need to go fix that. Okay? So scrolling down through this list, I don't want to play if I'm in the end scene. I want to play again. So I can rename play button to just play again. And I can change the text to play again question mark. The quit button is the exact same functionality as it was with the beginning. It'll either terminate the app or it will stop playing, whichever you pick at that point. Okay? So, one second. Okay, so at this point, we're done with the contents of each of those 3 scenes. Now we can start writing the code to actually bind all this stuff together. Actually, one thing I overlooked. If you go to play again, scroll down to the bottom, sure, you could go to level 1, but you can also go back to start. So it totally depends on what you want to choose. In this case, I just want to go back to start. Because, for example, I might have difficulty levels over there, and those buttons might send me to a different offset in my levels, or a different named level. So instead of just assuming that I want to go back to level 1, I'll go back to start. Okay? And let's see here. Okay, so now that we've got end and we've saved it, to actually go to end from level 1, it needs to be added to our build settings list. So Control-Shift-B to bring that window up. Now at this point, I can either drag that scene that we just created into my listing here, or I can click Add Open Scenes. And that just adds it automatically right there at the end. Okay? So now I should have the ability, once the code's in place, to go from start to level 1 to end, back to start to level 1 to end, and so on. Rinse and repeat. So now I want to jump over to my code, and let's do a bit of, let's see here, level management, right? I need to know, like I've got the ability using those 2 buttons to actually go to level 1 or whatever from start and then on to end, but I need the actual ability to drive that stuff based on whether or not I've won or lost. So to do that, when I create level, let's say 2, 3, 4, and then end, I don't want to call out the name specifically. I don't care what level 2, level 99, whatever. I don't care what that is. I just want to say, Unity, go to the next level in the sequence. So over in Unity, you saw in the build settings the numbers, right? 0, 1, 2. I just want to say whatever we're currently on, add 1 to it and go to that. Take the current, add 1 to it, go to that. Okay? So to do that kind of functionality, I need to know about the scene that I'm currently in. So over here in my code, up at the very top, I need to add a scene object. I'm going to call this current scene. Okay? Now, to be told by Unity that something has happened, I've actually transitioned to a scene, that way I can get information from the scene to then use later, I need to plug in to a little bit of extra functionality. So in Unity's documentation, if you search for scene loaded, you'll be taken to this scene manager.scene loaded event. And if you scroll down, you'll notice this looks a lot like some of the stuff we've written so far. Awake and start and update and blah, blah, blah. Well, the pertinent bits of code for us are this: I want to listen, just like the button, play button, quit button. I want to listen for when I've loaded a scene. And then I want to stop listening, like when the system starts up, I want to start listening. When the system shuts down, I want to stop listening. That's just good cleanup, startup and cleanup practices. And this is the method that's actually going to give me all the information from the engine. So I need 3 bits of functionality here. I need an onEnable, including this scene event so that we can actually get called. I need the thing that we can get called, and then I need to turn it all off. Okay? So jumping back to my code, let's see here. Just above this load scene stuff that we wrote earlier, load scene, quit game, that kind of stuff, inside the scene management spot, I want to come through and add a call to onEnable. Okay. I'll also need one for onDisable. And the method that I'm going to talk to is onSceneLoaded. Okay, and this one looks like I have to manually type out. So onSceneLoaded. Yep. It's going to take in a scene, just going to call it scene. It's going to take in the load scene mode. And this all comes directly from that documentation you saw just a second ago. I don't need these 2 private keywords, so I'll get rid of those. Now I need to actually start listening for this. So scene manager.sceneLoaded, add the onSceneLoaded call that I just wrote. Okay, this is going to prime the system to start communicating with that method down here. Okay, and when I disable, I want to remove that listener. So change that plus to a minus. Okay. So at this point, when we start the game, this should be called as soon as the game manager fires up. When we go from start to level 1, it should say you're now going into level 1. So we can start keeping track of that information. So that cur scene variable that I created up at the top, I want to assign it to the incoming scene variable. Okay. And now remember, the game manager is actually controlling our ability to play or not when we go into the game for the very first time. So would it make sense if I was playing in level 1 and then I went into level 2 that I was still actively playing? Probably not. That could act a little weird. So I want to use this call as my this is the central reset of the game call. It's a heads up to me that things are resetting. So I now can say be playing, that variable we created last lecture, is false. I'm not playing. Okay? Now, I also mentioned that as we transition scenes, we are both creating a bunch of bricks and we're destroying bricks. But there's also the possibility that the bricks might accidentally be left in an odd counted state, meaning if there's a discrepancy there, you will never win that level. So as just a secondary reinforcement of our brick destruction code, we can come between the scene and the play and say brick dot count, SN count, equals 0. This will enforce that we don't have any bricks going into this new scene. Okay, so now I said that whenever I win, when I win, I want to just say take the current scene and add 1 to it and go to that scene, right? According to our build list. Well, to do that, I need a method that I can call to say go to the next thing. So here between load scene and quit game, I'm going to create a method. I don't need to call this from outside of this game manager script, so it doesn't need to be public. I'll just do void, and I'm going to say next level. It doesn't need to take anything in because it's going to do all of its functionality internally. So I need to ask, well, for starters, I know I'm going somewhere, but I also know I need to get some information. So I want to pass updated information to the scene manager's load scene, right? So scene manager load scene. And notice it's got 4 different versions, that little drop down arrow, or the little up and down arrow. If you go scrolling through this list, the first 2 are the ones that are critical to us. Are we using the string version? Well, that's what load scene up here is doing. But in this case, we want to use the integer version. Okay? So inside the parentheses, I want to get the current scene's build number, its index. So that cur scene variable I had earlier, I can ask it for its build index. And then I would just want to add +1 to it. Now, you could, if you wanted to, omit that +1, and by calling this, it's basically a level restart because you're going to the same location. You could also say load and in a string level 01 or level 02 or whatever the current level's name is, which is also available off of this scene object, right? Cur scene dot. You have a whole bunch of other things like name. Should you want the string version? Okay, I don't want that code. That was just for demonstration purposes. So at this point, when I call next level, it will hopefully transition me to the next level. So now I need to actually call this. Well, how did I govern that? Well, if I've destroyed the last brick, I need to win or and go to the next level. So 1 second. So if I've won this level, right now we're just printing out that we've won, and we'll refactor that in just a second. So if I win, I need to go to the next level. Okay? If I lose, however, right, I need to be sent to the ending screen. So right after we just debug log that I lost, I want to call the other method that I wrote a second ago. Instead of going to a button or forcing us to go to level 1 or start or whatever, I want to go to end. Okay? Let's see here. Okay, so saving that, jumping, let's see here, jumping back to Unity, let that save. Okay, we'll verify our builds list does indeed have our current 3 items. So if I go back to start playing, I can hit play. And now at this point, if I go looking through my play area at the floor, I've currently got the floor's destruction code turned off. So if I turn that back on, right, and just for testing purposes, I want to move this brick out of my scene so it can't be interacted with. Right, and by the way, any kind of changes you make during play mode will be lost when you stop playing. So all of these updates that I'm doing in here, I'm not worried about it because they'll be reset as soon as I stop playing. So at this point, when I fire the ball and it hits the bottom death plane, boom, game over. Cool. So far, so good. So I can play again, and it sends me back to start, play. And now this time around, let's just double check. Well, for starters, because I reloaded the scene, that content came back. So my bricks, where it should be, I've got this artificially turned off so it would bounce if the ball hit it. So let's fire the ball, and it goes bouncing around the scene. And move the paddle so it doesn't hit that. Boom, game over. And notice down here in my logs, I lost a second ago and I now won. So now we verified that the actual flow of our program is functional. So now it would be nice to actually see our scoring information and that final screen, the whether or not you actually won or you actually lost. So let's go ahead and take care of that. So jumping back over to Visual Studio, I said that I'm going to use the game manager as a central repository for certain bits of data. I also know that as I transition from scene to scene, I've got those text objects that I created on my canvas. So I need to do a couple of things. One, actually create variables that I can store scoring information in. 2, I need to have code side versions of the stuff in my hierarchy that I can then bind to that would allow me to then fill in with information, modify color, that kind of stuff. So up here in my data section, I need a couple of bits and pieces of information. Now I'm going to be doing both things for my things for my level as well as things for my start screen, because they kind of go hand in hand as far as what's being tracked at any given point. So to deal with the ending screen, right, that actual text, I want it to say, you win, and maybe print out the score, or print out something else or whatever, or you lost. So just like I put the placeholder inside the inspector, win, lose placeholder, and I colored it magenta, I want to have a string that I'm going to fill in with data. I'm going to call it sEndText. And I'm just going to put a default of placeholder. Okay. I also want a color that I can modify. I'm going to call this endText color. And again, I'm going to set it to that obnoxious magenta color. And I mean, you'll see this stuff in other games if you ever get into a scenario where something has failed to load. Something will either, like in World of Warcraft, if a texture fails to load, you'll see a checker box, a blue and white checker box. In other games, you'll see just a magenta object. It means that the shader or the texture or something about it has failed. So these are indicators to both us, designers, developers, QA, or end users report feedback. Hey, something about this scene is wrong. So I also want to keep track of my score as I go from level to level. Now, you could very easily come in and say, I want to track scoring per level. And remember that on-level load would give me the ability to reset. If I wanted to accumulate like a total score across my entire play session, I could do that as well. So I need an integer called score. This is going to accumulate all of my values. So now I need those code side text objects. So text. Now notice text is not listed because I don't have the UI. So hovering over it, show me potential fixes. I don't want to deal with this MIME type. I do want this Unity Engine UI. So clicking that bolts on line number 5 right there. Okay, so now we go back to that teal color, and this one's going to be called score text. I need one more for the bricks, so bricks text, and then that final game over screen, that one I'm going to call game over text. Okay, so these will give us things to assign when we actually scan through our scene to find what's going on, or what it's currently configured as, right? You know, start will look different than end, but they're very similar with the exception of a couple of name changes and whatnot. Okay, so we good on all that? Sure. Cool. All right. So to actually get these 3 items linked up, to get the information to them, I know at some point I'm going to want to have some kind of a method that will update my UI. So, well, I can just call it update UI. It sounds like a good candidate to me. So scrolling down past, let's see here, we've got all of our, and if you've taken note, I'm labeling these little bits of different functionality. That way I can kind of keep similar systems together, right? I don't have it just shotgunned all over my code here. So as I go scrolling down, I'm looking at level management. I've got scenes loading and unloading, and then end conditions down here at the bottom. Let's see here. Right, so winning and losing and that kind of stuff. Now let's break it out into one further section and say this is for score and UI. Okay? So I need a method to scan through my scene, find all the text objects, and then actually update them. So I'm going to call this update UI. Now the thing is, let me look here. I know I've got 3 separate objects floating around that are going to independently need updating. Like if I destroy a brick, I want to update the score. If I transition to another level, I want to update all 3. And then at some point I want to make the brick both, when it impacts, I want to make it capable of both counting itself up, counting itself down, and modifying the score. So start would update the UI, on destroy would update the UI, and the hit taken would also update the points. And then when it gets destroyed, we can add, we have those 2 points value, points for collision and points for destruction. So to do those kinds of things, I know that I'm going to need external functionality. I'm going to have those objects call to update the UI. So let's see here. I'll construct those in just a second. Just be aware behind the scenes, because this is similar functionality called into a number of spots. It's a good idea to make these into methods. That way we don't find ourselves duplicating a bunch of code. So to start out, I need to get an array of the text that are currently in my scene. So we can revisit the find object of type, but in this case I want the array variant. So the little S right there in between, so objects plural, and I need to look for text objects. At this point, I want to iterate through that list. Whatever scene returned me a variable number, you know, in a level 1, it's going to be 2. In the end scene, it's going to be just that 1. Start should return me 0. So I want to do a for loop to run through all my items. So for int I equals 0, I is less than the text's length I plus plus, and give it its body. Now in here, I want to do a number of if checks to see what the actual name of the thing was. So if the text's object sub I dot name is equal to score text, then I want to do something. In this case, the score text object at the very top of the file, score text, right? Mouse over and you can see that it's a type of text. I want to assign that to the object that we're currently talking to, which is texts sub I. Okay? If it wasn't that, then I also want to consider, well, what if it was texts sub I dot name? What if it was bricks text? Well, if it was, I want to assign the bricks text equal to the object that I am currently inspecting. And finally, if it was the game over subtitle text that I created in the end scene that I renamed, else if texts sub I dot name is equal to game over underscore subtitle text, the game over text equals the object we're currently inspecting, but not a text array. Okay? So this is going to hunt through our scene, find all the objects, and properly link them to the 3 variables we have up at the top of the code. So that's fine, but I actually need to call that method update UI to get it to display any information. So update UI is the name of the method. If I scroll back up to the onLevelLoaded call, and at the very bottom, just after I've said I'm not playing, just call update UI. Every time I load a new scene, that call will be called, and I'll do a scan, find all my objects if they're there or not, and then use them, or rather prep to use them. Okay. So now I want to actually.
Can we go back down?
Yeah.
Last line, I missed that last one.
Yep, no problem. There you go. Just going to save that just in case. Good practice. All set? All right, cool. So now that we have targets for which to dump data into, we need to actually show these things on our screen, right? We need to format the information based on our scoring and brick and that kind of, actual data, and then push this content into the text. This is going to sound weird. Into the text property of the text objects that are out there in our scene. So, actually, pretty much exactly like what we did with the week 2 thing. We found our output text object, and then we set its .text to something. In that case, it was our individual story segment, our page, narrative, that kind of stuff. In this case, I know I need to do this for at least 3 things. So I need to show the score, show the bricks, and then when we get to the final screen, show it. So I need, let's see here. This first one for showing the score, I only want to show it from within the game manager. So it doesn't need to be called from any other script. So I don't need public. So we'll go with show score. And now the idea here is that if I have a score text object, which was set right here on line 119, if I have indeed found one of those, I can say that score text dot text equals score, and then add that variable I was tracking up at the top in score. Now, the thing about this, it's a little deceptive because over there in my editor, remember when I very first, blocked out my scene, I said, I mocked out what the UI would look like, and I explicitly said I want this to be a 3-digit, 3-digit kind of display. If I use this and I get to 1,000 points, it's going to say score : space 1,000. There will not be a comma. Now this is one of those like, well, how would I do that? Should I do something like divide by a certain number to get the tens, hundreds, thousands place, do math on this thing and then turn it into a string or whatever? Well, the beauty of C# and .NET is that some of this stuff has already been figured out. Currencies, localization considerations, the framework in the engine that we're working in actually gives us some of this functionality basically for free. So if you know about it, you can use it. And knowing about it just takes time, running through this stuff, seeing it, reading, doing more research, etc. So in this case, this code that I just wrote will work, but it will not be the same if you actually play the game. So you want to keep those kinds of considerations in mind. What I may default, what I might mock up initially might be different than what my code is actually doing. It might get out of sync in some way. In this case, it's a comma. And if somebody was paying real close attention, QA or my producer, and they saw that, well, I asked you for a comma in this and you gave me no comma, so fix it. That kind of mindset. So, well, that's per the aesthetic that I want to go with for this game. This code works, but it's not what I want to have happen. So I'm just going to comment that out. So you can see how it would work, right? Using string concatenation to add the variable to the string and then assign it. But alternatively, I can come in and say that the score text dot text equals. Now I've shown you various classes out there. We've got debug, we've got a bunch of stuff off of it, debug log, debug draw array, that kind of stuff. I also showed you how in the week 2 project, we could check to make 100% sure that the string that we were looking at was not null or empty, right? Before we actually did the scan of the entire array to actually populate our content. If you remember, I used lowercase string dot and then is null or empty. That was a method on the string class. The string itself is a type, but it's also a class. It's got data capabilities. It's got functionality in it. So in this case, string dot, notice I've got a lot of things. Right there's my is null or empty. But I also have this nifty little format call. So I could come in here and use format, and there's documentation on this. If you just Google C# string format, you'll find all the various settings and things you can use. This is a really powerful bit of functionality. And so the way it works is you write out a string and you embed in it things that will be replaced with some extra other items down towards the end, right? So the idea is you write a string. So in this case, I say score colon, and you add things from 0 to whatever that will be counted up. So 0 would be the next parameter, 1 would be the next parameter after that, so on and so forth. So the way you do that, a 0 is just a normal 0. There's nothing special about it. But this method examines if that number is inside curly brackets, it means something special. And what I mean by there could be, multiples after that, it would be something like that, right? Now, after the string, notice it has comma object arg0. Well, if you do comma, now it's expecting you to feed in some kind of thing. In score is the object. And what will happen is when this thing actually executes, that 0 inside those curlies will be replaced by the value that's inside score. Now I could, if I, for whatever reason, wanted to, add a second score, and that 1 would be replaced by this second entry. Okay? That's just a demonstration of why the 0 is there, but I don't actually need these second two parameters.
So you're making two of them instead, right?
Do what?
I guess. Saying it's like you're making two different sets of them, right?
Yeah, the idea is inside your string, you could write out this big long string and have like all kinds of different things. Say, for example, it said name, curly's 0, new line, address, curly's 1, new line, zip code, curly's 2. And for every 0, 1, 2, it would look at the next parameter in that line of succession. So every comma will give you the next one. Well, in this case, this code as it is written will be 100% identical to the code that I just wrote and commented out right here. But here's where the extra bit of functionality comes into play. Format uses special flags, not just those curly numbers, to indicate, like, should I represent this number as if it were currency? Well, what locale? What is it in terms of, if we were doing a floating point number, how many decimal points? Should I pad this to the left? Should I add leading zeros? That kind of stuff. You can use format to do those kinds of things. In this case, I want to add the comma. So the way you do that is add a colon in and then 0. And again, this is one of those things where if you look through the documentation, you'll see a zillion and one different ways to format a zillion and one different things. This happens to give me 0. Like if this was currency, this would be 1,000, 1 comma 000 period 00. Well, the period 00 at the end, I don't want that. So I believe that's what this second 0 represents. It means don't give me any additional information. The in is what triggers this is a number, add the comma notation. Those two are what really matter. And then the colon is what gives us the indication that all the stuff on the right is what's going to customize this. Okay, so that'll get us our score with a comma. Okay, now I said I want to do the same thing for the bricks. Thing about the bricks, though, is I want to call this from elsewhere. I want the bricks to be able to do this. So every time I count up a brick, every time I destroy a brick, I want the brick to be calling out to the game manager to say update. So it needs to be public. We're not going to return anything. Show brick count. And in here, if I have a bricks text object, I can set it. I can set its text object equal to the string bricks, colon, and add brick, the class, sn count. Okay, and here I'm not doing any kind of formatting because like I said, if I go above 999 bricks, then that's a whole different story. You could, if you so desired, if you wanted to go through and do this like one of those old school arcade cabinets or score keeping thing where it had like, you know, whatever the thing is, high score, and then 0001, 0002, you know, and it counted up, but you had those leading zeros. This is one of those scenarios where you could step in and say, we're going to format it using leading zeros and give yourself that visual old school arcade feel. Okay? So now I need to do the same thing, but for that ending text, the one that says win, lose, placeholder. So I don't need to call it from anywhere except for this script, show game over. Okay. If I have a game over text object, I want to assign game over text. I want to assign the text of that equal to that s-end text that I stored earlier. And then I want to change the game over text's color to that end text color variable that I stored earlier. Okay? Okay, so that gives me the ability to pump information into all three of these things. But you'll notice I've not called these, and also, what is in text? When does it and color actually get set up? When do these updates occur? Well, those updates, if we, so show score, show brick count, and show game over. If we scroll back up to this update UI, once we've found everything, right, we will have been loaded into a new level, and now we need to give that information to the screen. Then gameplay can resume and we can start counting up further. So at the end of update UI, after this for loop, I want to call show score to give me a score on screen, an updated score. Show brick count, which at this point it should be 0, and then as the scene for that split second as it's loading up, it should automatically count up. We'll see that update in just a second. And then we also want to show the game over. Now again, going from any level to any level, these three methods are going to be called, but your content in each scene is slightly different. So if the thing exists, it'll bind. If it doesn't, it won't. And those if checks will prevent it from crashing or anything, because it will say, this thing doesn't exist, ignore it, move on to the next line of code. So I'm using whether or not it exists to trigger these kinds of behaviors. Okay, so I know that as I start playing the game and as I slam the ball into the brick, I actually want to start counting up. Like, you got 1 point for hitting it, you got 10 points for destroying it. So I need to be able to update my score. So just between the update UI and the show score, I'm going to add a method that I'm going to call from elsewhere, right, when the brick slams, or when the ball slams into it. I'm going to call this modify. And I also, because I'm modifying it, I didn't want to update the visual. So modify and show score. And I need to take in a value that's going to be modifying it. Let's say you added power-ups and you wanted to add, you know, some kind of a lives. Well, in this case, bad example. So let's say you you wanted to take away from your score, right? You added some kind of a penalty thing. If you hit a brick, it gives you a point. If you hit one of these penalty things, it takes away. So in this case, I could feed in a positive or a negative value elsewhere in the code, and this code wouldn't care whether or not it was positive or negative. It would just update accordingly. So in value is what I want to bring in, and I want to say my in score plus equals the incoming value. Now that we've made the modification, positive or negative, doesn't matter, I want to show the score again to trigger the update. So this we'll call down here and we'll properly reformat our screen. Okay. So scrolling down just a little bit, I've got the ability to show the score and update the score. I've got the ability to show the bricks, and I'll be doing the updates on that in just a second. But I also have this show game over. Well, I've got this in text and this in color, but I need to actually fill those with information from somewhere. So I'm going to write a method that will be called from inside this script, so I don't need public. If I'm calling from the win, I'm going to customize it. If I'm calling from the lose, I'm going to customize it slightly differently. So void, I'm not going to return anything, set end text and color. I want to take in a string s value and a color called color. And these two variables, send text and end text color, send text, equal that to set it equal to my incoming value, and my end color, my end text color, set that equal to the incoming color. Okay? And now I don't need to do any kind of show game over stuff because this is not going to be called from that final screen. The level that we're currently in, if we're losing or winning, we'll set it there. Then when we transition to the next level, it will request these bits of information and do the update once we load in. So show game over will actually be called from that on level loaded for the new level. Okay? So while we're here, we can just do that. So if I scroll back up to win and lose, right? Before we just had these placeholders for winning and losing. I can go ahead and turn off the win output and say set end text and color. And here I want to say you win. And I can even do some formatting. If I wanted to add some color, you know, those color tags, I could do that. But let's see, drop down. And let's say that the final score was, and again, as a designer, keeping in mind, would I want to format this or just add the number? Totally up to whatever visual you wanted. So in score, okay, and then the second parameter is color. So let's, if you win, let's give them green. Okay, and for the record, to do this exact same thing, right, with the proper formatting, you would pump in string.format, same exact line of code, but here at the end, you could use that end zero thing I showed you a second ago, close off the string, and then the end score is the next parameter for format. So this whole line of code right here could be slotted in and replace this first argument going to the set in color, in text and color. That's how you would get that if you wanted to make it look the same way. Okay? So down here with lose, we're going to do the same thing. If you've lost, I'll get rid of that placeholder log and say set end text and color, and just say you lose. The color I want to use is red, pretty uneventful. It's green you win, red you lose. Okay. So now at this point, everything should be functional except for scoring and brick information. We don't actually have calls to that going, we've got the code to do it, we're just not actually doing it. So over here inside the brick, I need to make a couple of updates so that we actually track this information. Notice if I jump back to Game Manager, save that, jump over to Unity, let it compile, I should still get these two warnings about the points on collision and the points on destruction not being used. Well, that's correct. I'm not using it. I now have code to use it. So if I jump back to my code, jump back to the brick, and start looking, well, where would I update my brick counting visual? Well, how about right after we actually add one to the brick? Okay, so game manager.instance.show brick count. Because remember, this code asks the brick.s_in count for its value. So it will internally pull from this, just a line ago, updated value. Okay? And if we destroy a brick, we need to do the exact same thing. So down here, right after we've removed a brick, game manager.instance.show brick count. What's the other one? Show. Okay, modify and show. Right. Okay. So now we should have brick addition and subtraction stuff being printed to our UI. Okay. Now if I scroll down just a little bit further, over here when I'm actually taking a hit, I'm taking a hit in one of two ways. I'm either getting the initial ping off the side or I'm actually destroying the brick itself. So first thing I want to do is, if I have taken a hit, just generally speaking, game manager.instance.modify and show score. And in this case, the impact in points on collision is the value we want to pass through. And if I've gone ahead and destroyed the object, or this will be the destroy call, just before I actually flag the thing for destruction, I want to try to do, just as a general kind of guideline, I want to try to do any logic on the object before I flag it for being destroyed. If it's flagged and it gets destroyed before you do anything, I mean, yes, Unity is going to take a frame to do its actual cleanup, but it's possible these things can get slightly out of sync. So do your logic before it's flagged, before it gets destroyed, and then you're good. So game manager.instance.modify and show score, and in this case I want to use the points on destroy. Okay. So saving that. At this point, we can jump back to Unity, let it compile. Okay, no warnings. So if I detach this window, okay, I can start playing. And if I quit, we're shut down. Cool. If I start playing, okay, it's kind of hard to see. And if I zoom in and pause, I can pull my cursor, right, using the middle mouse button, or use these sidebars, right. I can pull myself up to the corner, so I have 1 bricks, and I would want to modify that to say if I have 1, then it's 1 brick. I want to modify the actual text so it actually seems correct. But then I have a score of 0 over here. So if I scroll back out, right, and then resume playing, firing the ball into the scene. Boom. Game over, you win. The final score was 2. 2 points because 1, I hit it, 2, I destroyed it. So I can stop playing. Okay, see, this is an example of what I was talking about when you press quit and it doesn't do anything. So over here in my start quit, the version that I'm talking to only exists right here. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let's undo that and slot in the prefab from down here in my project view. Okay? Reset that back to load scene, and I want to go to level 01. Okay? Save, jump back over to end. This scene doesn't even need a game manager because it will have existed from all the previous levels, right? Technically, level 01 doesn't need it, but because it's there, you could, for testing purposes, load directly into level 1 and it would function. So here for quit, I want to scroll back down. See it's missing because I got rid of it. Let me pull in the prefab version, game manager, and in this case, I'm doing, oh, wait a minute. So actually, I'm going to update both of these. So the play again button and the quit button, I need to drag in the prefab version and go to load scene here. And sometimes, by the way, it will remember what you had set it to a second ago. So just updating which prefab I'm talking to retains that I'm going to start. And here for quit, clicking on it, verifying it's the prefab version, and quit. Okay. So now that I remember that I've screwed up start, I'm going to go back to start real quick. Play button, scroll down. Who are we talking to? That one. We're going to level 1. Okay. Quit. Who are you talking to? You're that one. And quit doesn't actually send us back to level 1. Quit would send us to quit game. Okay. So saving that. So those are the kinds of issues that if you know where your object is being called from, where that script exists, are we talking to an instance or the prefab? Sometimes it misbehaves. Sometimes I incorrectly slotted in the wrong one. So real quick, just jumping back over and fixing that. This should now work. So we should still be able to quit. Okay. We should still be able to play, fire the ball. Okay, if I quit here, I stop playing. Okay, if I play again, and in this case, let's win one more time. You'll notice, generally speaking, this can take a while for the ball to eventually get back over. Just general debugging kind of stuff. I turned off the bottom bar so that I could get away with not having to make sure that the ball was properly bouncing. You can do the same kind of thing. If I pick up my level 1, and I'm going to leave that over there. If I go down to the brick itself, I can grab its scale, and, well, now it's gone. But I could scale it in the X, making it much wider, meaning it's a much bigger target. So for sheer debugging purposes only, those kinds of things are useful if you want to try to get yourself, as kind of like a cheat code, right? You could get yourself to the next level. Okay, so now that we've won, let's play again. We go back to start. Cool. Well, now that I'm playing, if I go back to my level, go back to the play area, and floor, trigger. Now if I play, I go to you lose. Play again. Okay, so to wrap all this stuff up, we've got 2 final things. By the way, that's all the code. That's all the UI stuff, that's all the code. So you would just want to make sure that your level 1, its play area, floor, is set back to trigger before you submit. Okay? Now, the stuff in here, right, as we've already done start and we've already done end, and everything seems to be updating properly. So as we start playing and we start constructing more levels, there's a number of things in here that we could definitely reuse, right? So if I just blindly duplicated level 1, all the stuff inside it, just the raw content, then any kind of changes I make for level 1 that I want to have also in level 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so level 1000, those changes wouldn't propagate. So this is where that prefab stuff comes in. So saving this, now down here in my, let's see here, let's go with the scenes, right? So if I did just another level 2, I don't get any of these settings carrying over. Okay, so I just duplicated that scene. But what I can do is, for example, I like the way the camera is functioning. I've already prefabbed the game manager. I like the setup for the play area, the paddle, ball, and brick, as well as canvas. I like the way all this stuff is set up. So I should be able to take each one of these things. Let's see. The camera, I'll duplicate out a camera. Let's go with the play area. Okay. Paddle. And I don't think I can multi-select and do this. I think it, yeah, see how it's going to fight me? So I have to do this line by, or object by object. So ball, brick. Now the canvas should be okay to pull it and leave this event system. The event system is specifically for interaction, like when you try to click on something. If it doesn't exist, notice over here, standalone input and blah, blah, blah. I think you can omit that and be perfectly fine. So I'm just going to, for now, I'm going to take the canvas, leave everything else. Okay, so saving this scene. Now if I create a new scene, a completely blank scene, I can get rid of the existing camera. I can drag in my camera. I can drag in, let's see, let's start. So I can pull in the ball, I can pull in a brick, I can pull in a canvas. I could pull in a game manager if I wanted to run from here. Let's just, for demonstration purposes, leave that off. I've already got the camera. Let's pull in the paddle, and let's pull in the game area. So if I start running at this point, I get all kinds of exceptions because these scripts, the objects that are on them, are trying to talk to the game manager that doesn't exist as far as it's concerned. So I would need either to start playing from start or level 1 and get to here, or just drag in a game manager and we'll be fine. So in this case, let's say for this level, I wanted to have a number of bricks out there in my scene. So at this point, if I start playing, should be okay. Okay, so that works. So let's say I want a number of bricks out there in my scene. So I can create an empty game object, and I want to reset its parent. I want to reset its transform to 0, and let's just call this like brick row of bricks, something like that. Take this brick, drag it under as a child, and now I can duplicate this several more times, right? If I go back to my scene view, with it selected, mouse over here, press F to zoom on it. Okay, so I can take this one brick over here, this next brick, this other brick, right? And I can move these and get them, you know, much more perfect, whatever. You could also come through, and now that I have the brick down here, I could actually make another slightly modified version, like if it had multiple hit points or a different color. So, for example, here inside the materials, I have a green brick. Well, let's say I want a red brick. So with it selected, Control D to duplicate. Change this from green brick to red brick. The brick right here, I can duplicate it. And now I can say this is brick version 2. I can change it to be, let's see here, red. And now, if I drag this up into my scene, I actually need to change this to red. That helps. Okay? So at this point, if I come through and I say you're actually worth 2 points and you get 5 points when you get destroyed, but you take 10 points of damage to actually be destroyed. Now notice, right down here, I have the original brick and I have this brick. But if I want to make that update happen across all of these, let's duplicate it again and slide it over here, something like that, right? The changes happened to this first one, and I happen to carry them over. But I could do, let's see here, selecting the first one with those changes, I can hit apply. Right? Now, what you'll notice is the original brick does not have those modifications. The original copies of the original brick don't have those modifications. Brick 1, the one I just changed, these words are no longer bold. Brick 2 has those changes pushed to it. You'll notice that the copy, where I modified that because I duplicated it, they're different. I mean, they're the same values, but it sees it as different. If I click revert, it then pulls those values back up from the prefab and resets it to what it was. So if I change this to like, a whole bunch of points, see the sizing difference between this line and this line, how it's bolded? If I just click revert, I go back to what I originally had. So this is a quick way of making objects that will be reusable, basically turn them into prefabs, modify them accordingly, and just remember, like with every one of these things that you're selecting, the prefab itself in the project view won't have any instance information up here at the top. But every one of the ones inside your scene will have a prefab link saying select who I came from, right? And then the ability to undo changes or apply changes to the master copy. So in other levels, right, you could do all kinds of stuff. So I don't want to save this level, really. Just a heads up, if I did, and I did save it, I would also need to pull it into this list and reorder it so that it functions, so that level 1 could go to level 2, and then level 2 could go to end. Again, it's taking into consideration these numbers over here on the right for next level, that method we wrote. So here, like if I did indeed save this scene and move over, I'm not going to because I don't need it, but all those prefabs still retain their different settings. So here I could pull in a red brick, and now it's got 2, 5, 10, and it's got the red color. So I could easily go in and customize the scene, make more brick row objects, that kind of stuff. And if I don't want to save any of these settings, I can just reload the level that I'm currently in, and I go back to it. Okay, so final thing, submission. With nothing selected in either of the two windows, the very first thing you want to do is make sure that you've turned off this Arkanoid layout. We don't need it. That was strictly for layout purposes. It shouldn't even be in the final product. You can delete it, whatever, doesn't matter. So making sure that's turned off. The second thing is making sure that your floor is set to is trigger. Now notice it became bold because it's a prefab. So now if I take a look at the play area down here, its floor does not have that change assigned to it. So what I need to do is, with the floor selected here, or I think I can do it with the parent as well, but that'll push all the objects. Actually, they're one big prefab, so that'll pull everything. So here, click apply, and if I check the floor again in the hierarchy or in the project view, I now have the setting changed. So make sure you have the floor set back to a trigger and turn off the layout. Now, saving this scene, you would go through and do a play test to make sure all your stuff is actually functioning from start to level 1 to levels 2, 3, 4, whatever you want to create, and then end, and that you can properly loop back around. Once you've done that, with nothing selected, again, if you currently have something selected and you can't click off or whatever, then you can use Control, press and hold it, and click so that your inspector is empty. Go up to Assets, Export Package. You'll get this exporting package dialog. look through all your stuff, make sure that it's only the things that we're dealing with. I don't need this Facebook library stuff, but I do need everything else. So if I export, in this case, I'm going to dump this onto my desktop. I'm going to name it Art Test Export. Your naming convention is determined by the actual instructions on the week 3 project. Again, follow the rubric. Make sure you've hit everything in there, because that's, I mean, everything I've just done is pretty close to all of it. You just need to go above and beyond with any of those like basic, intermediate, and advanced features should you want the extra points. Levels, you know, a really easy way of getting extra points, make another level. Just duplicate what I just did, throw a bunch of stuff in there, and as long as it functions, that's like 5 extra points. It caps at 20, 25, something like that, but that has absolutely saved a number of students from a failing grade if your other core tech doesn't function properly. So you can pull out a win there. So I'm going to export this file, and it dumped over here onto my desktop right there. All right. So now I'm going to go through, and this is also part of the instructions, verify that your stuff actually works. I'm getting this file. If I open it up, import it into a test scene, reorder things, and stuff doesn't work, well, it's a low grade. Maybe a 0, maybe not. Create a new project. In this case, I'm just going to say this is my ARC test proj. Dump it to my desktop. 2D, 3D doesn't matter. Turn analytics off. As Unity takes its time firing up, got a lot of stuff to power up. While I'm at it, I can go ahead and close out this Visual Studio. Okay, so Unity's back, and if it does this is a bug, ignore that. Okay, so at this point, I can jump back over to my desktop, double-click this Unity package, it will import, looking through my list, appears I've got everything. Okay, import. At this point, I should have all my content, so let's load into Start. One thing you will notice is that if I start playing here blindly, not checking other settings, if I hit play, error. Quit will do what it's supposed to do. Well, why is it giving me an error? Well, we saw this earlier. I have to go through. This is not part of the export. It's not covered the way we do it. I, on my end, will manually do this for every one of your projects. So if you have custom level ordering, custom difficulty stuff where your level order matters, send me a screenshot or something, or tell me what the order is so I'm not guessing. Otherwise, I have to look through your code and try to figure out what you've intended to do, right? So at this point, I can just go through my scenes folder, select it in, shift selected down to start, pull all 3 of them over, and in this case, the order is backwards. If I started playing now, it would actually, because again, next level is governed by the index of the scene, not the name. It would go from level 1 to level 2, which is start. So things would be a little weird. You know, the game wouldn't actually play correctly. So I need to reorder this just a little bit. So now I can start inside start, go to level 1. Next level after level 1 would be 2, 3, 4, end, whatever. And end is going to be customized based on whether or not you've won or lost, killed all the bricks, or hit the death plane at the bottom of the screen. So now I should be able to go through and play. Jump into level 1, and because this was a new project, I don't actually have that resolution set, but I will have it fixed up on mine. If I turned around let's see here. If I turned around and said, let's do the Command-Shift-B again and build, right? Over here on my desktop, if I turn this into an actual executable, then the screen should update. I've not tested this on the PC. I've verified it on the Mac. So if this doesn't work, whoops. But now it's going through. And notice those dialogues that popped up. If I left that editor code, that editor application dot is playing equals false, if I left that outside of those pound if Unity editor, then that step, that build step, would actually fail. It would say, I can't include editor code in a final build. So just a heads up if you ever see that kind of stuff later on in your future. So ArcTest2 was the file. Double click it, and number one, this dialog should not have been there. But again, because it's a different set of settings. Okay, so we'll go to windowed, and let's give it a normal resolution. Okay, I'm setting this, if you can see it, to windowed. I'm going to go down to 10 by 7, and now I'm going to hit play. The second it starts playing, it resized to be the screen resolution that I said in code. The original 224 by 256, all of that scaled up by 4, that's this resolution. So now I can go through and play. I can't see anything, but that's basically it. So as soon as I hit that brick, the score would update. This brick counter would drop to 0. Okay, and if I quit, it quits the whole game. So that's pretty much it. Soup to nuts, that's the entire Arkanoid project. Everything you need to knock out those basics. Cool? So if there's there's nothing else in terms of code or anything like that. So I'm going to start addressing questions here in class as well as here in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. So, all right, thank you very much.